Hello and welcome to Brain Trust Live number 514.
This week on the podcast, bad things are happening a lot out there, but sometimes good things happen, and that's okay too.
Plus, will John Fetterman ever make it to his beach vacation, or will he be stuck forever in the one big beautiful bill, vote-a-rama?
We'll have all this and more.
This is Brain Trust Live.
Hey y'all, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com. And you can find us with good news.
Here we are.
Sometimes good things happen. Rarely, but it's out there.
Yeah.
The possibilities are possible, which is all that we can really say about this time. But
Sure.
Zoran Mamdani won the mayoral primary in New York City in a pretty spectacular fashion.
It was so wild. I was texting you that night, and I think you were playing pickleball.
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, I think this is over already. And you were like, what now?
Yeah.
Because I was like watching the numbers come in, and I was like, I had read, because it's ranked choice voting, and everybody was sort of like,
it could take a year for us to know anything.
Right, and also, I think people were, based on polling and stuff, people were making estimates that, Cuomo, at the end of the night was probably going to need to be ahead by 8 to 10 points at the time, because so many of the second round votes were probably going to go to Mamdani based on, the Lander Cross endorsement and just the entire campaign to just not rank Cuomo anywhere.
Right.
So, once it looked like it was even going to be remotely close, I was like, oh, well, this thing is hooked. And then, that was 30 minutes after they started counting the votes. And I was like, that's why you were surprised. I was surprised as I was texting you also. But I was just like, am I bringing good news to the masses, right? Because I don't think anybody was expecting to know anything.
No, I wasn't even. I was like, I will look into this before I go to bed. And then I will wake up in the morning with some speculation. And then 3 weeks later, I'll get some answers.
Right.
I was prepared to never find out the results of this primary. Right. And instead, it was so fast. But also, Mamdani took so many neighborhoods. The New York Times had a sort of precinct by precinct breakdown. And obviously, look, I can't tell you about how I am expecting very specific precincts in the outer boroughs to vote. But I can tell you exactly how I expect every single precinct in Manhattan to vote. And I was shocked by how many precincts he was winning in Manhattan. And that's when I was like, am I missing something about what everyone knew on the ground? Because, my parents had been supporting Mamdani, and they had been sort of, because of that, our precinct went for him. But even that was a little bit shocking, because that's, the demographic makeup of my parents' current voting precinct is not really who you expect to be in the Mamdani coalition. It's a lot of
Right, they're not necessarily in the Cuomo one, but they're
pretty wealthy. They're definitely working in, corporate or financial services sectors that were nervous about the Mamdani situation. And I think it just goes to show you how many seemingly well-off people in New York City are also experiencing a cost of living crisis that no one is addressing. Yeah. Because, it was some of our least favorite neighbors were ranking him first. Oh, wow. And people that I would never trust with this kind of information. It was really pretty shocking. Brad Lander did really well in our precinct as well. Cuomo came in second, but when you add up the Lander-Mamdani votes, and Mamdani was winning our precinct, it was 2/3 of the electorate were voting for those two. And shocking results like that all over the neighborhood that I grew up in, which has changed so dramatically in part in response to this cost of living crisis, that I was very much not expecting them to be voting for a 33-year-old Democratic socialist.
I know.
And I was also shocked, I expected a lot of the Upper East Side to go to Cuomo, and it did. I expected a lot of the Upper West Side to go to Cuomo, and it did. But there were these pockets of Lander voters. There were pockets of Mamdani voters on the Upper West Side, which I was like, things have really gone off the rails.
Yeah.
So it was very exciting. And possibly, I think the most exciting piece of it was the breakdown of who actually turned out.
Oh my God. Well, the turnout was crazy anyway. Mamdani himself got nearly the amount of votes for the entirety of number of people that voted in the last Democratic primary.
Which is, by the way, exactly what a ranked choice primary can bring. When we talk about making sure that, that people feel sort of invested in and included in primaries, which the party's not talking about, but I think voting activists are often talking about. One of the ways that you can make sure that you get turnout in the general is by driving this kind of excitement in the primary, because many more people are now actively invested in this race than have ever been at this stage ever in history.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It was very exciting. But anyway, the highest turnout was with 18 to 24-year-olds.
That is so crazy.
Have you ever heard of that?
And then the second highest was 24 to 29, and then the third highest was 30 to 34.
I mean,
that's insane. In the last election, it was 60 to 69.
Of course. That's how it is. That's what you think
That's
it's
how it
going to be.
always is.
That's how Democrats campaign, as if it's always going to be 60 to 69.
Totally.
I have another observation about this as well, though. Do you want to hear it? I'm telling it to you anyway. The curve of voter turnout is really interesting because it dips pretty significantly for millennials. And I have a theory about why that is. Because one of the reasons I was so shocked about this is millennials are the most progressive generation. So to have...
Still true.
Yep. We're the best, and we can't help that. But to have this kind of result with turnout that has sort of millennials underperforming in the turnout and Gen X and Gen Z overperforming is really kind of interesting. But I think that what's happened is that millennials have been priced out of the city, and they don't actually live there anymore. Gen Xers are the last generation that was able to buy into the city at all. The cost of living crisis has meant that millennials have sort of at least disproportionately had to leave. And I think about that.
Sure, they live in New Jersey.
Yeah, they live in New Jersey. They move to other cities.
Either,
you know,
by the way, PS,
no, but I mean, like, there's nowhere cheap to go, but there's cheaper places than New York City to go. When I think about my own friends and peers, and how many more of them left New York than I ever would have expected. I mean, what am I doing outside of New York? I don't even make sense outside of New York. And yet, I've been living in California for 18 years at this point.
The cheaper option.
I moved to LA, and I was like, it is basically free here. I mean, like, the amount cheaper LA was when I moved here really can't be overstated. So, like, I think that what's happened, and part of why the electorate in the city has been so weird of late, is that I think that millennials are not even represented in the city anymore because our generation has gotten such a bum deal that we're not even in the city anymore. We had to leave. And I think, you know, Gen Zers are still either young enough to live at home or young enough that they're just starting out in their life with 40 roommates and they haven't yet tried to make an adult life for themselves. Their dreams aren't dead yet. The system hasn't... It failed them preemptively, but it hasn't fully failed them in a way where they've
the millennials have gone through, 100... failures now at this point.
Like, it takes a while to get rid of young people, but you can do it if you work at it.
Right.
But so in any case, so there's something I think really interesting also that those numbers show us about, you know, what kind of opportunity there is in appealing to very young voters in the city, in part because the voting bloc that would traditionally give you a progressive win can't afford to live in the city anymore. They're not there.
Yep.
And so anyway, this was wild to see, and very exciting.
Very exciting.
For everyone except Democratic establishment people. They're very unhappy.
Total panic-stricken right now.
And I don't know how it could possibly be that they don't see a clear takeaway here being a cost of living crisis, considering that is what propelled Trump's victory.
Totally.
And it is now what's propelled Mamdani's victory in the primary. It's literally, you don't have to propose socialism. You literally just have to be like, I see that your life has gotten too expensive and I'd like to do something about that.
That's why I don't understand, like, there's so many takeaways from this election, and it seems like the takeaway from this election could be the same takeaway as it was from the 2024 national election. Yeah. In terms of, the affordability crisis. Yes. Because it's like, we just saw a group of people recently and they were like, do you think that this is now like the new model for Democrats? And like, I'm not delusional, right? And I know the
blowback's going to be awful.
Yeah, of course. But I also, I grew up in Iowa, and like maybe Zoran Mamdani is not like running for governor of Iowa with any great success as a Democrat. Like maybe we're not ready for like brown socialists in Des Moines.
But maybe Dan Osborne is. Maybe there's some version of this.
But what I'm saying is like they are ready to have a Democrat come in and stand 10 toes down and say, it's too fucking expensive around here.
Exactly. And it's so wild that Democrats won't just give us that.
Right?
Because, and it's, I think,
it really is the racism.
Yes. No, it's
I mean, that's literally all it, it's the only thing that it is.
It's the racism and it's the corporate money.
Sure. And
their buyers
are
not
in terms
allowing them to give definitive statements about their stances.
But in terms of why he's scarier than, like a white guy delivering the same message,
yes,
obviously.
in Mamdani specifically.
In Mamdani specifically, yes. But yeah, no, I think you're right. Well, and I think it's like, it's scary for them, I think, for a few different reasons. Because, like, and the most scary thing to them, I think, is that, like, they went to the old tricks.
Yeah.
And the old tricks didn't work. You know, they outspent him, like, 30-1. They pulled in all of the people to endorse him at the end, brought out, old decrepit Bill Clinton in the final hours.
So that they could all sex pest around together or whatever.
Right. They, made false accusations. They used the scare tactics. They tried to coalesce at the end, both with Clinton. But
they also literally photoshopped pictures of Mamdani so his beard would look darker.
Right. Uh-huh.
I mean, they were doing everything that
they
you
were
can
doing
think of.
Literally everything, and those things have a 100% success rate of working in the past.
Yeah. You know what?
There's
I can think of one race that did not work in.
Well,
and it was the race AOC won.
Well, but what I was going to say is I even think that is different because
that was a surprise
because it was a total surprise. Yeah. They had months of this and knew that there was bubblings of this in February.
Yeah.
So,
but I think it's a similar thing where they don't even have the sort of imagination to take a candidate like him seriously.
No, I think you're right.
And so I think they underestimated him in part because they were like, surely this isn't
But they
real.
ran the same playbook that they did with Bernie, and that worked.
Right, yeah.
I mean, like, I don't...
No, you're right.
So I just think it's sort of like... It has shown, like, a little bit of a crack in the machinery in a way that, like... That's troubling to them.
Yeah.
Like, because it sort of, like, shows that, like, they no longer have control of what's going on. Yep. Right? I mean, the fact that they literally outspent him by, like, $30 million. This guy only had money because he qualified for matching funds from the city.
By the way,
commercial for matching funds.
Matching funds.
Hello.
Good Lord.
Right?
Also, though, I think that there is a sort of history that they failed to take the wrong message away from, actually, when it comes to this kind of major spending in a mayoral race in New York City. Because the last time that I can remember money just, like, blowing a candidate who had no business being anywhere into the conversation is Bloomberg's third term. He spent something like $30 or $50 million on that race. He outspent his opponent.
Well, he had to because it was an illegal third term, wasn't
it? Right, exactly. He spent that, it was like, he outspent his opponent like a zillion to one or, whatever. He only barely won the race, though, and I think they took that, message and they were like, see, you can always buy a race if you work hard enough.
Sure.
But actually, I think it should have been a little alarming to them that money doesn't go that far with city voters. And I think if they had been listening to Brain Trust Live, they would have heard us say this a million times at this point, but you actually need the votes at the end. You can't buy... The money can't buy you votes if you're not selling a product anyone wants.
Right. And Andrew Cuomo wasn't even trying to sell a product.
I was like, Andrew Cuomo had no platform. He was already somebody that New Yorkers hated.
Seemed disinterested.
He was so hateful that there was an active don't vote for him campaign instead of just, part of the reason that, all of these other candidates finally figured out how to game the ranked choice system was because they were trying to box Cuomo out together.
Yes.
And it gave them the opportunity to do that. And Eric Adams won that ranked choice primary last time because no one understood how to game that system.
Right.
This time it was like all of these candidates who wanted to win, but also were like, the main thing is we got to make sure that Cuomo doesn't win. We're able to figure out how to game the system together. Like it.
And my favorite part about that is because yes, I do think that like not ranking Cuomo at all, and this idea that all of them sort of like cross-endorsed or like at least endorsed not ranking Cuomo, because like like Adrian Adams like did not cross-endorse anyone and wasn't really super fond of Mamdani, but also finally in the last days sort of claimed that she wasn't going to rank Cuomo.
Right.
So it's like even those things I think sort of like took their toll on him. But I was also like, you were seeing the establishment set the stage to take down ranked choice voting. There were multiple op-eds in the days leading into the election about like why ranked choice voting is undemocratic from the editorial board of the New York Times. I mean, it wasn't them, I don't think. No. Although they did sort of like quasi-endorse Cuomo after they claimed that they were never going to endorse anybody anymore.
Yeah, remember when they were no longer endorsing anyone ever again in any election, and they have found a way to endorse in every single election since. But anyway.
But there were all of these, you could see that they were sort of like laying the ground for work for when, if Cuomo did lose, they could be like, well, it's the ranked choice voting.
Right.
But he lost on the first
Right.
round.
He wasn't good. He didn't win on any.
So they couldn't
rounds.
even go with that.
No.
As their excuse.
Well, and he so stupidly thought he was too good to play the ranked choice game. So the reason that we knew that Mamdani was going to get to the 50% threshold is because we knew who had cross-endorsed him, and we knew how likely he was to be ranked on somewhere on the ballot on every other candidate's, supporters' ballots.
Right.
Cuomo, you saw this in the New York Times. The New York Times did this really interesting story where they asked all of these high-profile New Yorkers what their ballot was going to look like. And almost all of the Cuomo voters only had one or two people.
Yes.
And everyone else had ranked all five.
Yep.
And so the Cuomo people were not telling their supporters how to play the ranked choice game. They were not campaigning for second ranking, which is dumb. Because if there's a surging candidate like Zoran Mamdani, that looks like they could, take over the lead, you want to make sure that you're at least ranked second on the ballot so that everyone else on the ballot supporters put you second and you can squeak ahead that way. They thought they were too far ahead of the pack to play that kind of a game. And that turned out to be as dumb as anything could have been in this situation because it meant that, as soon as the first ranked votes were in, there was no hope that Cuomo would gain anything in the second round. He got barely any second round votes at all because he didn't campaign for that. He didn't think that he needed to campaign for farther down on the ballot.
Yeah.
The fun of the ranked choice system was you got all these candidates together who, it was like, Mamdani and Brad Lander could go campaign together and be like, hey, rank one of us first and one of us second. And, Mamdani could go and be like, please rank me first, but also please, put Brad second. He's great. Yeah. Like, it gave everyone
what a real
an
hero
option.
he ended up being, too. God. And also was, like, I think very helpful to Mamdani, not just because of their cross-endorsement, but also sort of like, being there in the face of some of those late attacks that felt very Islamophobic, even like that appearance on Colbert that they did together where Stephen Colbert like did his best job to like take down Mamdani in a way that felt very weird, but also I guess maybe not.
I think
when
it was
you think
planned.
about it. It was planned,
I'm sure it was.
Course,
I'm sure they knew that was coming up. But
you
putting his
know
sort
what I
of
mean?
face,
It's like
becoming the face of sort of providing credibility to Mamdani. First of all, he's whatever the city equivalent of a patriot is, because whatever he thinks about Mamdani's policies, and I actually think he probably thinks they're great, because Brad Lander is pretty progressive and, has been doing a good job as comptroller in the city and been very communicative with, voters in the city. I've been following him, the entire time that he's been in office as well. Him and Mark Levine kind of have like a big sort of like internet, Twitter communications presence. Mark Levine is the Manhattan Borough president, and I think he's about to become the comptroller. But I feel like he did a good job of, taking what was his sort of like skill as somebody who could really, he was the Liz Warren of the race. He could get like these sort of upper middle class, white educated voters to kind of feel reasonable. And he did that and then kind of provided the credibility for Mamdani, who a lot of those voters would have been like, well, I don't know if I can vote for a Democratic Socialist. And was sort of like, actually, he and I share these priorities. The person who doesn't share them is Cuomo. Right. Let me make sure that I take down Cuomo first and foremost, and then we can discuss the rest of it later. Yeah. But also, it was a baller move for him because he's actually set himself up to run for much higher office now.
Everybody thinks he's a hero.
There is like an old saying in New York that being the mayor of New York is a dead-end job. And that saying, I've gotten into some arguments with friends about it recently, but that saying predates me. I'm not saying it because Rudy Giuliani never became the president and Mike Bloomberg never became the president. The saying...
Bill de Blasio never became the president.
Right, Bill de Blasio never became the president. I'm saying it because John Lindsay never became the president. That is how that saying came about. The mayor of New York City doesn't ever go anywhere. That's just like a famous thing about the job. So if you're worried that like Zoran Mamdani is going to like take over America, like don't worry yourself. He's never going to get a job higher than the mayor of New York City. If he becomes the mayor of New York, you got to make sure he becomes the mayor. Right. Because then you've got him straight out of the lineup.
It's not done yet.
It's not done yet, exactly. But like, if you can make sure he becomes the mayor, you will not have to worry about him coming to your town. So don't worry about anything. But Brad Lander raised his profile and raised also his sort of like goodwill with the voters to such an extent that I think he can run for Senate, he can run for governor, he can run for Congress.
Anyone running against him in whatever his next race is.
Exactly.
Is going to be trouble for them.
Exactly. No,
so I hope he picks somebody who's rotten, because there are a lot of them in the state of New York.
There's plenty. Right.
Tragically.
Plenty of people to pick from. But I mean, like, this has been, you know, this has not been a political loss for him. If you loved Brad Lander, do not worry about Brad Lander. Mm-hmm. He is on his way to bigger and better things now. Yep. And that was because he made the smart choice to enter this agreement with Mamdani's campaign to cross-endorse.
Yeah.
That he sort of saw the writing on the wall and saw the future in a very smart way that I feel like a lot of really entrenched city politicians are not good at.
Right.
So, in any case, it's exciting times.
For sure. And I also think that, like, to your point sort of about, like, how you think that Lander probably, like, does agree with him, like, on most of the things that, like, was in his platform. I think it's important also to, like, because I've been seeing a lot of people be like, oh, well, people voted for Mamdani because, like, they felt like it was the cool thing to do, and, like, he had great social media, and he, like, you know, is young, and he's handsome, and then people found out that his wife was hot, and there were all of these different, and, like, I'm sure that, like, first off, it should feel cool to vote for someone.
Right. It was a cool thing to do to vote for him.
Right. But, like, secondarily, I think that, like, Democrats focus too much on that, I think, a lot of times. Yeah. Especially sort of like in a post-Obama world, we're always looking for, like, our next Obama. Yeah. You know, it's sort of like it's got to be, like, the cool, hip guy who, like, can speak well and, like, all of those things.
Yeah, and the analysts didn't listen to him when they made these announcements about how, you know, when everyone who's sort of, like, analyzing this race as, like, a cool factor race wasn't listening.
But that's what I'm saying, because I think that, like, if he was only cool and had cool social media and didn't stand for anything, I don't think he wins this race. I think that, like, Democrats, like, too often, like, are not willing to accept that, like, the voters are, like, actually paying attention to their platforms. Like, the reason that, like, he won was because voters liked his ideas.
Exactly.
Like, yes, maybe they thought he was also cool.
Right.
Like, maybe they met him on his walk from the one end to the other of Manhattan. But,
people love idea people, you guys.
Right? I just feel like, and this idea, like, we have run elections just on vibes.
Yeah.
We just ran one.
That's right.
Remember when we were all fucking coconut pilled for like 100 days leading up to the general election in 2024? Do you also remember how badly we lost? It was because, like, they did everything they could to make it feel super cool to vote for Kamala Harris.
That's right.
Right? But it turned out it wasn't, because nobody wanted to hire a bunch of new ICE agents.
That's right.
And because nobody wanted to do whatever, nobody wanted to keep funding a genocide.
Right. No, exactly. And
you want to talk about how so many 18 to 29-year-olds voted for Mamdani.
Yeah, I know.
I got news for you, friends.
If they're scratching their heads wondering about that after watching the way that the Biden administration cracked down on college campuses, let alone the Trump administration, I
just feel like we should be able to, like, go out and, like, make that part of, like, what we're selling to people. Like, it shouldn't just be about, right? Like,
you're running for office.
You're right.
Literally, that is what you're there to do.
Go sell something other than, like, I'm fun and cool.
Yeah. Well, and also, Mamdani's a great speaker. He is also just, like, a Bronx science kid who's kind of a nerd. Like, he's not cool without these ideas. The ideas made him cool.
Right.
Like, that is the other thing I think they're failing to acknowledge about how it is that, you know, it's like Tim Walz was pretty cool given the context. And it was just because he was having ideas about what they had accomplished in Minnesota that he thought they could accomplish nationally.
Totally.
He was the only person who even entered that arena with ideas, and then they took him from him, whatever, and then he stopped seeming so cool after a while. But I mean, like, it is always cool to vote for somebody who's proposing anything. It always feels cool.
Totally.
You don't actually need a cool person. You just need an idea.
No. Bernie Sanders, deeply uncool.
The most uncool man on earth. And yet, I can't think of something that was more trendy than supporting Bernie Sanders in any of the elections. That was what cool people were doing, is they were Bernie Sanders people.
I was going to say, it was the ideas. It wasn't his fact that he was an old, crotchety man.
Right. Like, that's the ideas as a candidate are what make you cool.
Yeah.
And also, I think that they are sort of, you know, he was very clever with what he proposed, because a lot of the ideas that you get people scoffing at being like, well, that's a little unrealistic, are things that there's no reason that they should be unrealistic. Like, free buses shouldn't be an unrealistic goal. We could do free buses. Like, you got to prioritize free buses, but, like, the idea that we have to be told that we can't have free buses because that's a little unrealistic. Instead, we have to live in a city where we can't afford our rent, and you know, there's food deserts everywhere, and whatever. Like, it's not actually a compelling talking point to tell me that he's being a little unrealistic. Like, first of all, moderate Democrats campaign all the time on what they think is realistic policy, and they never get it done. So, I've had multiple conversations now with people who've been like, well, it sounds nice in theory, but can he really do it? And it's like, well, Joe Biden couldn't really do any of the things he proposed and chose to do none of them. So, the number of Democrats that you happily vote for who are offering you nothing and deliver even less in return is astronomical.
But also, I would presume, and I wasn't paying close attention at the time, but I would bet that that's what people were saying about de Blasio's kindergarten plan. Also.
Of course. And he actually, although if you talk to these people, they think he was the worst mayor in history because he got kind of blackballed by the police union and the media.
Well, that's going to happen to Mamdani too. So we got to be on top of that. Yeah.
But I think actually the playbook, the de Blasio playbook is going to be harder to pull off in this situation because they've already done it. So I was thinking about this recently with, some friends who work in the financial sector who were worried about his lack of experience and worried that the tax base was going to shrink because of, because all the people, all the wealthy people in the financial sector were going to leave. They made that threat with de Blasio too. And guess where they all still live? In New York fucking City.
Right.
They tried to move their operations out of the city and their staff wouldn't go with them.
Yeah.
The people who were going to leave did it already because they were mad at de Blasio.
Right.
The sort of the empty threats that they make about, how they could just pick up their business and go somewhere else, as if somewhere else can be New York City, is insane.
Right.
The city is exceptional. Sorry if you are mad that the city also requires you to pay taxes, but the city is exceptional. That's why you're there. The taxes are already high. You've already chosen to pay them.
Right.
You already live there. And
right.
You're not going to move the whole financial sector out of New York City because a brown socialist has been elected mayor. And you just have to live with the knowledge that you're not going to do that. And you also have to live with the knowledge that your talking point about, how you wish you had more experience is a fucking dumb talking point, because let me tell you who's the mayor in recent memory who has had the most experience. It was Bill fucking de Blasio.
Oh,
and
sure.
Then Eric Adams.
Yeah.
A man who was literally a foreign agent.
Well, and also to that, I would say, yes, he's younger, but if the appropriate experience for mayor isn't working in city government, then what is?
Exactly.
Right? I mean, he's in
state government.
Or state government, right? But he's an elected official currently in government.
Let me tell you how much their favorite mayor, by the way, had never held elected office, because their favorite mayor is Bloomberg.
Well, that's what I was just about to say. Michael Bloomberg was only just a general rich person.
Exactly.
He didn't have the appropriate experience to be mayor.
Let me tell you who else had zero political experience. Rudy Giuliani. Let me tell you who probably had the most relevant political experience is David Dinkins, and they drove him out of town basically on a stake. The way that they talk about experience in city government without acknowledging that they, A, don't want people to have experience in city government, B, it can only go two ways. You can either become progressive working in city government, or you can become a corrupt criminal. And we've had both. Ed Koch resigned amid a massive corruption scandal. He had a lot of experience in government, mostly federal government, but, he was the mayor for all of time. Eric Adams was a borough president. He was in the city council. He's had tons of experience. And look at what that has brought us, is he's a foreign agent for Turkey and an indicted criminal who's had to be pardoned by the president, But when you talk about experience in city government that doesn't look like criming, you're talking about Bill de Blasio. Is that your favorite mayor? I don't think so.
Right.
So I think that a lot of this playbook, which they're going to try again, is it's going to be old hat, because their threats didn't ring true last time. Is Mamdani, if he becomes mayor, going to have an issue with the police? Yeah. Because every progressive mayor does. And they're going to be pests about it. And I don't know what to say about that. But he is going to come in knowing that that's the case. That wasn't an assured thing with de Blasio. People were pretty surprised, I think, by how, aggressively the police took him on. I don't think that's going to be the case. Mamdani is going to know that's what he's walking into. So some of these things are not going to be threats that they can make in the same way anymore.
Right.
Because all of this is going to, and it's going to be the most racist, horrifying campaign you've ever heard in your entire life. And you are going to find out that people that you trusted are monsters, and you are going to find out that you are a monster. Everyone's going to find out terrible things about themselves in the course of this race. And I hope that at the end of the day, they can look at themselves in the mirror and wonder if they just still like good ideas. Sure. Because having the idea to try something is really the only thing you can ask of an elected official in this day and age.
Yeah.
We're already going to be seeing federal budget, the federal government is going to stop sending money to everyone. So there's going to be massive budget issues in every city in America.
Yep.
They are going to, blame all sorts of crimes on people in cities that have nothing to do with them because rural America is armed to the teeth and is shooting each other constantly. But apparently we can't talk about that. Like, all of the same things that you are used to sort of like being wielded at cities are going to be. And also it's going to be worse because we're going to get these weird Islamophobic attacks. They're going to be based in lies. The financial sector is going to put a lot of money into, propagating those lies. But at the end of the day, you still can't like buy people. You can't sell people bad ideas.
Yeah.
Like, someone is going to have to sell people good ideas in order to defeat this.
Oh, I know. That's the thing. Like,
and
everybody's
I don't think they're prepared to try that.
No, I don't think they are either. And that's what, like, I don't get. Like, there's, some various different rich people are on the internet right now sort of like trying to brainstorm who it is that they can fund to run against him. And it's sort of like, whoever you want.
Right.
But like,
are you going to have ideas? Is that person going to campaign on anything? Or you're just going to be like, Zoran Mamdani is a anti-Semite or, whatever they've already been trying. And he knows what attacks are going to come at him. He is going to be prepared to deal with those attacks. And I think the endorsement situation is an interesting insight into that. Because, of course, all the moderate Dems are starting to eat themselves trying to figure out what to do about not endorsing him. But do you know who immediately came out with an endorsement? Jerry Nadler. Which is, I think, telling, because he's sort of one of the elder statesmen of the, of the New York delegation. Yeah. But also because he has the closest ties to the Jewish community of any member of elected office in New York. And it's clear that, like, he sees the future. Or someone in his office sees the future. Sure. Someone sees the future and understands that progressive credibility is going to rely on him throwing his hat in with this guy instead of with Andrew fucking Cuomo or Eric Adams. Yeah. He understands that he is probably, playing a bit of a role like Brad Lander in, trying to diffuse some of that sort of all those hyped up lies that were being told about Zoran. But I thought that was very telling that he came out so quickly. And then, I don't understand why the rest of these fools can't just do a tepid endorsement and then mind their business.
Right? I mean, like...
that's what Adrienne Adams did.
Yeah, I know. Like, she sort of, like, I think even made a smart remark, something to the effect of, like, well, we'll see if he even wins. Right. But then she said, but I'm a lifelong Democrat, so I'll support the Democratic nominee. Yeah. Like, that's all you have to say.
That's right.
I actually think, and maybe I'm delusional on this, but, like, I actually think most of the ones who haven't done it, like, will come around.
Yeah, I think
so too. Varying different reasons that they may personally have. Well, I think the reason is that
their future with the electorate is going to rely on them not looking like idiots.
And I think that, like, most of them have not been saying that they're not going to do it. Right. Most of them are doing I'm not ready to
even yet. Schumer tweeted something nice about Zoran.
Right. They all want to have a personal conversation with him. But, like, Richie Torres is shitting bricks right now. Oh, yeah. Because Mamdani won his district. And he was also planning to run for governor and hilariously said that he wasn't going to run for governor if Mamdani won. Well, because you sort of need help in New York City if you're going to become the governor. That's right. So it's like, if you become antagonistic with the city's mayor, good luck to you becoming the governor. So
no, they're going to have to rethink the calculus of who they think voters in their district are, of which voters are paying attention now, because this is going to also affect sort of downstream, the electorate for other elections that are coming up. This is going to affect who turns out for midterms. This is going to affect a lot of things.
Yeah, but I also think that part of why they're waiting is because all of them obviously have to run 17 different focus groups.
Obviously.
So they're waiting for data.
Right.
And then also, I think that they are just... they really are in a bind, which I love because I fucking hate all these people.
Exactly.
But like they're not going to endorse Cuomo now.
No, it's suicide.
They can't. They're not going to endorse Adams.
No.
And what does that leave them? Exactly. I mean, I guess maybe some like mystery new independent that like doesn't yet exist that like some billionaire is going to fund, but even that is like a gross look for them, which like maybe they don't care. I
think I know exactly what their only option is, and it's something that people do exercise in the mayoral race in New York City, and it's to not endorse. But I think that will be notable.
But they're going to be asked about
voters.
It until the general.
Exactly.
Anytime a camera is in front of them, they're going to be like, "Are you endorsing in the mayor's race?"
And I also think they were waiting for someone to stick their neck out and see what the reaction was, and that's what this Gillibrand, kerfuffle
Hoo-wee.
has taught them. You guys, Kirsten Gillibrand went on Brian Lehrer, which, if you are not from New York City, is like a daily news radio show where Brian Lehrer like brings on city people and they talk about city politics, and there's callers and they whatever. A caller from New Jersey calls in to ask about a long list of untruths that he claims Mamdani said.
Right. Brian Lehrer even says,
like,
we don't know that, because they were just, taking live calls from listeners, basically.
They screen those calls,
They do screen those calls. You're absolutely right.
So
but
I don't know what was going on there.
Yeah.
Either the caller lied about what they were going to say, or Brian Lehrer's call screeners were feeling real frisky that day. But
Gillibrand didn't care whether it was true or not.
No. Also, Gillibrand, in her wildly Islamophobic, just like banana pants answer.
She did everything but accuse him of personally doing 9/11.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She keeps going on about how she has to, in response to this caller, she's got to do what her voters want. The caller was from fucking New Jersey.
I didn't even think about that.
Like, fuck off. Right. He's not even one of your voters. In any case, it was so egregious that it got removed from the stream because my mother heard it live. Obviously, as soon as it came online, called every friend that she has in America and was like, listen to Brian Lehrer today. They all listened and they were like, I don't know, she just sounded kind of boring and whatever. And then my mom listened to it and she was like, oh my God, they removed that part. Luckily, some intrepid Twitter reporter caught it all live. So you can still hear it. But it's clear that Gillibrand's team demanded they remove it. Because
I'm sure.
There is no way you're Brian Lehrer and you have that kind of radio gold and you remove it of your own volition,
Yeah.
I mean, Brian Lehrer...
He was giving her outs also.
Yes, he kept being like, well, we have to say we don't know if any of this is true, so feel free to, acknowledge that in your answer. Like, he was coaching her through the answer.
Yeah.
And yet, she couldn't stop herself.
No.
So... I feel like maybe now seeing that, she's put the rest of them in an awkward position.
She really has. Didn't Kathy Hochul say something today about, like, we can't be doing that? I don't think she referenced her specifically, but she was like, it was obviously in response to that type of rhetoric because she was like, we're not going to be talking about people like that.
Yeah.
So, like,
no.
And Kathy Hochul is I mean, let's face it, like, she's probably not a big fan of this guy.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
I guarantee that what happened was that Gillibrand only talks to donors anymore. And received 400 very concerned and angry phone calls from her donors that were using all of these, lies, these Islamophobic lies to justify why they were concerned. But their real concern is financial, of course. Like, this is sort of what people are using to cover themselves because they actually are just greedy assholes.
Sure.
And so I'm sure that she, because none of these people hear from their actual voters. They hear from a collection of donors who happen to have access to them, had heard a lot of concern in the air as soon as this happened. I'm sure every Democrat heard a lot of concern in the air as soon as this happened. I think that the reason that Nadler was still able to endorse is in part because he is already so deeply at the forefront of trying to figure out if there is like a moral line he can't cross on the issue of Gaza because he represents this very, vociferous Jewish community, but also has more so than ever in his life tried to draw some strict moral lines about what he can and can't support when it comes to the Israeli regime. In a way that actually has been a little surprising to me, having grown up in a New York where you couldn't say anything about Israel without getting your head blown off. So I feel like the fact that he's already at the front lines of this conversation, so he kind of already is getting that hate. So he's like, come at me,
Yeah.
Whereas Gillibrand is only dealing with it from the donor side, I'm sure.
Probably.
She's not part of the Jewish community. She doesn't have a deep personal connection to this issue. And so...
She doesn't have a connection to New York City either, does she?
Well...
I mean, everybody if you're running a statewide campaign.
She is sort of... She's a classic upstate New York political character where she ran for Congress originally in upstate New York in a very rural district. But she was from the city. She was a fucking corporate lawyer. And she was, I think, originally from upstate New York. Like, I think she's from upstate New York in a historic sense.
Sure, okay,
but none of these people are from the district in upstate New York.
Got it, okay.
That's what they all carpetbag their way back. I could go run for Congress in that district and be roughly as credible as any of these people.
Right. Yeah,
so,
got it.
Yeah, so she's not a New Yorker, but she's certainly put her time in New York City. But she's not in regular New York society. I'm in the Senate New York Society. She's in rarefied old person New York Society. So I'm sure that, she had heard a lot of concern about this and I guess reflected it accurately on Brian Lehrer. I think we learned a little bit about where her instincts lie when it comes to knowing how to find her own moral compass amidst anyway, the clip is crazy.
Yeah.
And crazy enough that my mother immediately picked up the phone and
Right.
called everyone she knew.
Yeah.
And crazy enough that they had to remove it from the stream.
Yeah.
So I think the rest of the electeds are probably a little nervous now because that has made it much harder for them to not take seriously a Mamdani endorsement.
Right.
Given that this is what they look like they're doing if they aren't willing to do it.
Right.
And now what's she going to do?
Right.
Who's she going to endorse?
I don't
She's
know.
going to have to endorse Cuomo? Because let me tell you, she's not going to go back to the Senate again if that is her if that is her plan.
Yeah, right. Oh, God.
Anyway, so the endorsements are going to be slow is the moral of the story.
Yes. I think so.
And I also think that the endorsement conversation is going to end up focusing so much on Israel, weirdly. And, like, the guy's running to be the mayor of New York City. Like, calm the fuck down.
Well, and honestly, it's just not... Well, first off, the thing that everybody's, like, most recently obsessed with is this whole, like, globalize the intifada statement, which he did not make.
No.
By the way. He was asked about, I think, somebody else saying it and was, like, pressed to condemn it. And honestly, I think that, like, his not backing down on some of these things, I think, is what people like about him. Not just on this, you know? I mean, it's just sort of like... He always has the same response to, like, does Israel have the right to exist? Which is an insane question because, like, no country does, but every country does in the sense that, like, they're acknowledged by the UN and they currently do. But, like, you know, and then his response is, but, like, no country has the right to do war crimes and genocides. And he is going to say that, I think, probably until he's blue in the face. Whereas a lot of other politicians would have said it once, seen the heat, and come back and been like, well, what I actually meant was.
Answer. Yeah,
but he's doing the same thing on other answers too. I was sort of like flabbergasted. He was on Aaron Burnett the other night and like got asked whether he liked capitalism or not as a socialist, which again is sort of like an insane question because like outside of Democrats who are going around like, you know, I mean, outside of Joe Biden who started every sentence with
his love of capitalism.
I'm a capitalist, so. But, like, he said no and then quoted MLK at her.
Right.
Noted Democratic Socialist.
Right.
And she didn't know what to do with herself. And, like, also in that same interview got asked something about billionaires. And he was like, I don't think they should exist. No. I realize these are separate issues than the Israel issue. But I'm just, I bring them up to say that, like, I think that, like, him being able to sort of be like, no, this is what I think, and here is why. And, like, you can ask me again tomorrow, and I'm going to tell you the same thing.
I, like, have principles.
People like that.
Yes. People like when they know where a politician stands, and it's almost like politicians have decided that their most important job is to never give away where they stand.
Right, exactly, yes.
And, like, that is such a confusing turn that we've made in our consultant-driven political environment right now. But, like, also, a lot of these issues are issues that everyone understands the nuance of because they think about them in their real lives, too. And so I don't think that these answers read the way that Democratic strategists think that they do. I think especially in New York City, where, you know, there's, I think, a lot of frustration that we can't have a more sensible conversation around Middle East politics and, you know, has been for years. I think there's a lot of frustration because of the dominance of the financial sector around, you know, what we talk about when we talk about capitalism and how we think about capitalism, what its role is in the city economy. Like, I don't think that these are necessarily topics that, like, require, you know, him to kowtow to, like, I mean, the kowtowing is for donors. It's not for voters, is my point, I think. I'm talking around it a little bit. Like, I think other politicians are not doing this because voters want them to do it. They're doing it because donors want them to do it. Yeah. And that's a different thing entirely. And I think without much in the way of donors, he doesn't have to feel hamstrung by these sorts of things.
Right.
Also, I think another thing that is maybe a larger theme here is because, you know, I was thinking about this because my mother at one point declared that she was only ranking Native New Yorkers in her rankings.
Oh, yeah, right.
And so she had taken Brad Lander off her list. And then she kind of, when they did the cross endorsement, she was like, actually, I kind of like Brad Lander. So she put him back on her list. But I think that people in New York City want a mayor who loves New York City. People in New York City are obsessed with themselves.
Sure.
I haven't lived there at least full-time
in still years. Think that it's the center of the known universe.
I still talk about it like there's no other place on Earth, and still think that I am from the only place on Earth.
Yeah.
Like, New Yorkers deserve a mayor who loves New York and is, like, of New York. And, like, Zoran Mamdani is a New Yorker.
Sure.
And so even these conversations that he's wading into around international issues and around, like, economic systems or whatever, his perspective on them is as someone who is part of the community that is having these conversations. He is not an outsider imposing what national Democrats think New Yorkers want to hear about these issues. He understands the nuance of the Israel issue. He's from a city that is a quarter Jewish. He's from there. He lives with the people who are living and breathing this issue. Like, so he understands how to talk about this issue in a way that both pays respect to his principles and is also respectful of people who live in the city.
Right.
And he cares about people in New York City because he's from New York City. Those are his people.
Yeah.
So, like, I think, you know, someone like Cuomo coming in, carpetbagging his way through the race, you know, someone like Eric Adams who lives in New Jersey when he gets elected to be the mayor of New York, coming in, like, those are sort of like cynical ploys to capture, you know, New Yorkers via, like, financial, like, donations essentially.
Yeah.
But, like, actually people like voting for someone who loves where they are from.
Yeah.
Because the people voting for him are from there. Everyone in this equation lives in New York.
Right.
So, like, why wouldn't they want a New Yorker to be the, you know, my mom's criteria had been she only was going to vote for people who took the subway by themselves as kids, or would have taken the subway by themselves as kids, because she was sick of people from out of the city coming in and telling us the subways were too dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
And
Andrew Cuomo did look like he was afraid for his life in that one photograph.
Well, it's probably the only time he's ever been in the subway. And he probably heard from Kathy Hochul that it was very dangerous, another famous non-subway rider. You know, like, the subways are like the great equalizing force of New York City. That's why Bloomberg pretended to ride the subway to work every day. Like, the idea that we had all these people coming in to tell us it was too dangerous there, and it's like, well, we have no other way to get around. So I don't know what you guys are talking about. Right. Like, I too would love to have a chauffeured car, but that's not in the cards for me. I'm on the subway. So, like, what is it helpful? It's not helpful for you to tell me it's dangerous down there. You know? So, in any case, I think that some of this testing, you know, focus group testing and voter, you know, polling kind of missed this, like, inevitable thing where, like, Brad Lander obviously loves New York City. Zoran Mamdani loves New York City. Like, the people that did well, you know, outside of the money just love New York. And so people love them back.
Yeah.
That's also a thing.
Yeah.
In any case, it's exciting. And don't let anyone tell you that you can't be excited just because it might get scary. I am sick of people being like, well, you know, it's going to all fall apart. And it's everything is always falling apart. Time just marches on. Everything is always happening. I don't know what to tell you about that. It's okay to be happy about a promising, optimistic thing happening when it happens. Like, could it go terribly? Yeah. Anything could go terribly.
Yeah.
Like, Donald Trump is the president. Things are already terrible.
Sure.
So we don't need to pretend like we can't have happiness for happy things.
I know.
You got to take them where you get them.
Yep.
So, in any case, don't let naysayers tell you that they're deeply concerned about the situation because of a future concern that hasn't happened yet. Like, fuck off.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on to national politics.
Move on. Yeah. First off, I think they're voting on all this shit right now.
Oh my God, I know.
The one big, beautiful bill. I didn't really want to investigate what this was, truth be told, much.
Well, it's horrible.
And I sort of did earlier today. I haven't checked. I don't know what's going on right now. I think they're in a vote-a-rama.
They are.
The parliamentarian is involved somehow. I think they're ignoring her. I think they're... Who knows what they're doing? The reason that I tell you this is because you're listening to this potentially on a Tuesday morning, and the information that happens from here on out to the end of the podcast may not be relevant.
Right.
But I think the way that we make it relevant sort of to what we've been talking about on this podcast since November is that, you know, this bill is insane, right? I mean, it really is sort of like potentially like the largest transfer of wealth ever to the top, considering the making permanent of these tax cuts. It's the largest cuts to food assistance we've ever had, massive cuts to Medicaid. We're getting rid of a ton of tax credits for solar and companies that produce renewable energies. And so there's estimates that energy prices overall could go up by 30%. I mean, like, you want to talk about an affordability crisis. I mean, the one
this
big
bill's
beautiful
not making
bill
it easier.
is not making it easier. And it's interesting that we've been talking about how, like, that was such a laser focus of what Mamdani was talking about. And what I sort of want to talk about in regard to this bill is that, like, I have not heard that laser focus from the Democrats about this. They're certainly out there. They're out on television. But I feel like a real sort of like cohesive message about why this bill is bad in its entirety is what's missing. Because I think they're hitting on all of the pieces appropriately, probably right. They're like talking about tax cuts for billionaires, which sure people don't like. But like I think that there has like I saw a recent poll and then I sort of like didn't go back and re-find it before this podcast. But there was like, and it wasn't an outlier. There's been a lot of polling on this bill lately. And the one thing that you see is that like people who know anything about it don't like it, but you're always seeing like literally like 30, 40, 50% of people having no idea what it is.
Yeah.
And then you're seeing something anywhere between, if the people who do know what it is, I saw something where like 8% of people knew that there were massive Medicaid cuts in here.
Right. And nobody wants Medicaid cuts.
Nobody wants
that. Doesn't poll well.
No. And also like to the point where like you've had specific states hospital organizations, like the organizations that like represent these hospitals, because it's like it's cuts to people's Medicaid and then it's also cuts to like money that's going to, so like there's all of these hospital groups from like conservative states. Like I just saw a TikTok about like the letter that got sent like from the Louisiana Hospitals Association to like the representatives of Louisiana, who are all Republicans obviously, and they were like, please don't vote on this because our hospitals will close.
Right.
So like this is bananas, but like the fact that like that those polling numbers exist where like people don't know what this is and they don't know why it's bad for them is the fault of the Democrats.
Yes.
Right? Because the Republicans are going to try and keep it secret for as long as they can.
Well, and their whole job right now is to tell us this.
Right.
They don't have any voting power, fine. But they all act like, well, we don't have any voting power, so I guess we can't do anything except sit around and look at ourselves. Like the whole job that you have right now is a messaging job. It's the only job you have.
But I think it should be your life is going to be harder if this bill passes.
This bill will make your life more expensive.
Yes.
Done.
You've done it. Yeah.
Like the whole reason people voted for Donald Trump is their lives were too expensive. Turn his messaging back around on him. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how suddenly they have no idea how to like access mass media. They have no idea how to act. Like nobody seems to have any idea how to like get a message out anymore, and yet Republicans are so effective at it.
I know.
And like I think there are certain Democrats that are very effective at it, and they're constantly being sidelined. Like you know who knows how to get a message out is AOC. Call her up and ask her what she thinks you should do.
Yeah.
Like I don't understand how it is that they have like they're so mad that there's like a couple of people in the party who are like their own personal messaging machine.
Yeah.
And instead of working in conjunction with them in a moment of crisis like this, they are continuing to sideline them.
Yeah.
Because Bernie and AOC are out there talking to their own audiences about this. Their voters, I'm sure, know exactly how bad this bill is.
Yeah.
But how do we get that messaging in front of, the voters of some of these more moderate Democratic representatives who have not ever tried to talk to anyone?
Right.
Like, ask AOC what she's doing.
I know. What was that Slotkin tweet that I sent to you and Grant earlier this week where she started it like as a CIA agent and former special ops or whatever the fuck she was in that. I understand like how important having cheap housing is or something like, I mean, it was just like, it was sort of like, well, that's not, you're not doing
that's
it.
Not the right one. That's not the right one.
But like we're getting shit like that from people because they don't know
how to talk to anyone.
They don't know how to talk to humans.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
No, and also they are so busy trying not to represent any specific grievances or values.
Right.
That they are not able to talk about the things that this would actually do.
Right.
So like they're
why aren't we on the airwaves?
Why aren't we on the airwaves? Where are the fucking airwaves?
I mean, I'm not where are the airwaves? I mean, listen, I'm not watching a lot of cable news, but I'm watching a lot of television.
Yes.
So,
Right. Where's a commercial?
And
where's an ad on my YouTube?
Am perpetually online.
That's right. Right.
So,
Brent is still, I mean, you're even on Twitter.
A lot.
Yeah. So he's everywhere that you might find a message.
Yeah, I'm proud of my continued presence on Twitter. Listen, you gotta slum it sometimes.
You gotta slum it sometimes. And that is certainly what Twitter is. But in any case, it's interesting to me also that, I mean, you were the one who told me about this Lisa Murkowski shit. And it's interesting to me that no one messaged around that because did you know, thanks to Brent Thornburg, I do, that Lisa Murkowski, and I guarantee other members of the Senate are trying to do the same thing, was basically trying to exchange her vote for getting Alaska exempt from all the cuts.
Yeah, they know it's bad, guys.
They have heard about that.
Yes. She literally, like, got a bunch of stuff taken out. There was, like, and they framed it as, like, a carve-out for, like, the non-contiguous 48 states. So it, like, also included Alaska, because I think they knew that if it was only Alaska specific, then, like, that was going to be problematic, probably with the parliamentarian. And this has been thrown out now, like, her carve-outs. So I'll be curious to see how she, like, does end up voting. But, like, they also, you know, Tom Tillis is one of the no's, because there are a few Republican no's. I think they can only stand to lose one more. He's out against it after he announced that he wasn't going to run for re-election.
Right.
So, like, he also knows.
Yeah. It's so not bad that everyone knows.
They all know it's rotten.
Yeah. It is a political death knell for each of them individually to have voted for this.
Right.
This is not actually survivable
some
politically.
Some of them don't kick in until 2028.
Exactly.
Which is a classic thing that you do when you know it's terrible and you just want it to be somebody else's problem. That's why all of Trump's middle and lower middle class tax cuts that he did pass in his first term, those all sunsetted in the Biden administration.
That's right.
So, like, your taxes went up as just like a general human living in society in the Biden administration. It was the Trump tax cut plan, which is another question as to why they didn't
mess around that.
Well, or make it a top priority to, like, rescind they could have just done away with all of the. Even Joe Manchin wanted to do that. I don't know, like, they couldn't get their act together to just
Brent,
undo
change
those.
Takes time.
Sure.
Don't worry.
Sure.
They would have gotten to it eventually if they had been in office for another 600 years.
Right, exactly.
But I mean, like, every single Republican representative knows that this is a fucking disaster for them.
Yeah.
And yet,
Here we are.
So it's not that this isn't defeatable. If there's one thing we know about the Trump administration, they're very defeatable. Everything they try is defeatable. And also, another important piece of Carla Nordstrom wisdom, everything can be undone. So we don't have to decide that this is how things are going to go. We do have to decide right now that we are not going to pass a bill that drastically remakes the U.S. economy to make it even harder for us to essentially buy the political speech that's necessary to overturn it.
Right.
That's where I think we need to get ourselves in gear. And of course, they're doing a vote-a-rama now. Everyone's furious because they're all missing their beach vacations.
Oh, yeah,
John Fetterman. The poor John Fetterman, in order to ensure that millions of Americans lose access to their health insurance, he is missing an important family beach vacation.
Yeah.
And
well, it probably is a problem for him that he's missing that, because I think he's probably about to get a divorce. His wife is not pleased with the current state of
and
marriage.
I think that there are probably some things happening outside of this that are going to make the understanding of what this bill ends up being, if it does pass, more problematic for them than they realize. Like, I've just been hearing a lot of dissent coming from surprising sort of sectors of, people's Fox News brainwashed parents or whatever, who are, upset because of the ICE raids, upset because of how that's affecting their local economies. Like, there are all these other things happening.
Yep.
Where I don't think they can afford to make these kinds of cuts without everyone losing their shit.
Totally. Well, and also, like, I think that there's, this has now been fixed, and I'm sure Marjorie will probably vote for this, but there was that moment that sort of, like, went a little viral recently where somebody realized that there was a bit in the bill where it made it illegal for any states to pass, or the federal government to pass, any legislation that would, like, restrict AI for the next 10 years. Do you remember this?
Yes.
Like, where they couldn't pass any laws to sort of, like, do anything about AI. And, like, she went online and she was like, I did not know that was in there. Yeah. And it's like, so there's, like, literally, like, I think one of the things that Schumer's trying to do right now is have the whole thing read. I don't know if like that is, and that's just, I think, a ploy to, like, push the vote.
Yeah.
Because I think probably inevitably it will, and some version of it will probably end up passing. But there's just, like, so much insane shit in there. There was a provision that, like, would have made it easier to buy gun silencers. The parliamentarian had that taken out. There was a provision that was going to limit the ability of courts to, like, put the Trump administration in contempt of court. Like that you were like not going to be able to like do that with like sitting president or like something insane where it's sort of like it's going to make it harder to like sue him or whatever.
I also have another
that got thrown out too. But
thought about this as a long-term impact, which is I saw a chart of the breakdown of what percentage of every state's budget comes from the federal government, and obviously the bottom of that list. The states who are going to lose the least. The states who will lose the least
yes.
are the wealthiest states.
Yeah, of course.
It's California,
right,
New York,
California,
whatever.
New York, yeah.
The state that is going to lose the most is actually New Mexico, weirdly. But every other state below that is relying on huge amounts of federal funding for their budget. And we're talking about states like Alabama, Mississippi,
Sure.
And so a state like California is only losing 10% of its budget if all federal funding gets cut. And we, of course, pay everyone else's. Right. We pay all the taxes that pay for all these other things. But like these things are going to disproportionately, and I know I'm not the first person to make this point, disproportionately impact the voters or the very people that are voting for it in much more immediate and specific ways than they're going to impact vote. And I'm not someone who's out here saying like, well, we should all just pretend we're going to be fine in California. We won't be. It'll be annoying here too. Everything's going to be annoying everywhere. But like, I do think it is interesting that they are sort of putting themselves on the line in this way when the blowback where they're from is likely to be fucking disastrous. Whereas a 10% budget shortfall in California doesn't have the same consequences for how this state operates. It's not ideal. Right. I don't want it.
Right. We'll still have hospitals here.
But we will probably still have hospitals here. And we will also probably still have the ability to do sort of state-sponsored Medicaid-like programs, to some extent at least. It's going to be states that already have nothing and don't pay any taxes and don't have a tax base to ask to pay taxes, because the thing that we have in California is a tax base.
That's right.
And that's another state where I'm like, go ahead and tell me you're going to move out of here. Yeah, you're going to move out of San Francisco and LA because you're a rich person and you don't like high taxes. Good luck to you. I hope you enjoy your life in Montana, but you will be there alone because there is a reason cities are special.
Right.
And people want to be in cities because of what the cities offer, not just because of the financial situation in the city. If rich people were so concerned about their pocketbooks, they wouldn't be living in high cost of living areas in the first place.
Right.
The reason the city's expensive is because everyone wants to be here. It's because it's fun.
Right. Yes.
It's because everyone's here.
Yeah.
You get to be with everyone else. That's what's fun. If you were so worried about saving money as a rich person that you were like, well, I can't afford to have my taxes go up anymore, you wouldn't own a $3.8 million 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side. Right. You would have moved a long time ago to Montana. You could have a whole fucking estate there.
Right.
So, like, don't let rich people tell you that they're going to leave en masse to whatever. They're not going to. Fuck them. Yeah. But my point is that this bill is going to be so disastrous for the very people that are going to have to carry water for it. I'm so curious what happens about that, because I think already the administration, because people don't like these ICE raids, is starting to peel back support. Yeah. Like, just the general perception of the administration is very different than it used to be. Yeah. And like, do they have the leverage to get away with some of this shit?
I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure they'll do it, but but getting away with it in the sense that there's no consequences, I just don't think that could possibly be true.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter because Trump himself wants to sideline all these idiots anyway. They're just doing his job for him.
Totally.
They're creating the conditions under which they will be sidelined. Yeah. But none of them want to ever have power again? It's dumb.
Real dumb.
It's like your whole reason for existing. It's not principles that you're there for. You're there for the power. What else is it offering? Riches and power. You know what? You need a democracy to have the riches and the power. Being Trump's henchman is very that's risky business.
It surely is.
He goes through people real fast. There's no loyalty in his world.
Once you're out of favor, you've got nothing.
And you're in jail.
Sure.
You know? I mean, once you're out of favor with him, you go to jail. So I wouldn't be getting into bed with these people on that account. Mm-mm. In any case, that's my thought now that I've looked at a chart. Now that I'm a scientist, I can tell you that. In any case, I guess we'll be back next week to tell you what happens with this bill. But in the meantime, it's okay to feel happy that Zoran won the primary. Yeah. Let yourself feel optimistic about the fact that voters are not just by and large horrible people. They're just regular people. Sometimes they make bad choices and sometimes they make good choices. Mm-hmm. And we could appeal to their better instincts if we tried to give them anything to vote for.
But if you are worried about I would second everything that you just said. Yeah. And also, I would say, if you're having concerns about the things that are going to be happening to him and the money that's going to be spent and the things that they are going to do to, blackball him or whatever else, that is also appropriate feelings to know are coming.
That's right. But be prepared. Just prepare yourself.
That's what I was going to say. Like, just know. So, like, having the thought is fine.
Right. Don't let the thought make you so fearful that you don't do anything fun.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Right. Like let's know what's coming. Let's gird our loins.
That's right. Let's gird our loins.
But then, live a little.
That's right. And it's okay to be optimistic. Progressivism requires optimism forever. It's just an optimistic movement. An optimism in the face of no sense whatsoever most of the time. But the nice thing about being progressive is you get to be optimistic forever. So, like, don't give that back because you want to be pessimistic. It's more fun to be optimistic. Fun people are optimistic. They give you ideas like free buses. In any case, that's
I'm going to need you to remind me of that sometimes here and there.
I'm aware. I know. Well, when I realized that the one thing that, like, progressivism offers me is just, like, the sort of idea that things could be better, even if they aren't going to be better. I was kind of like, I feel like people are maybe missing out, especially moderate Democrats who are like big doomsdayers always.
Yeah.
Are missing out on like the great human experience of being able to have optimism in any situation. Because like it doesn't require not being realistic, but I feel like it's why I was able to start the Trump administration and be like, well, let's have ideas. Ideas are what defeat this, not sitting around being sad about it.
Yeah.
And like it allows you to kind of like carry yourself through moments like this, where the whole political environment is a fucking shit show, because things could be better. I know what we could do to make them better.
We're aware.
So like I don't feel like I need to sit around being like things have to be like this. They never have to be like this. Yeah. That's what progressivism offers you, is the ability to be like things don't have to be like this. And just because they are, doesn't mean they have to be forever. As I said earlier, time just keeps marching on. Things just keep happening in a row,
Yep.
So, in any case, that's the news.
Bye.
Bye.